Welcome back to Pagitt Radio, broadcasting live out of Twin Cities. That's our little theme song that plays here on the radio show. It's called Radio Nowhere. It's a little Bruce Springsteen song, and I dig it. It's one of my favorite. I'm going to give a call here to my friend named Deth Im. Deth is a fellow that works in the Kansas City area, and he works with a nonprofit organization. And that nonprofit organization tries to help bring an end to basically what I would consider it to be, and I'll ask him if he thinks the same thing, functional usury. It's usury in the sense that it asks people to pay an incredible amount of money to borrow money. You might not think this is a big deal, but it's really a significant thing that people have to pay sometimes. He'll tell us it's like 50% or 100% or 300% interest on the money that they borrow, right? Because money's hard to come by when you don't have any. And Deth does this good work where he tries to say, hey, we should change our laws and not let people charge folks $1 bajillion for the money that they borrow. So we're going to have Deth tell us why, as people care about the world, we should care about these functional usury kinds of issues. And Deth is in the Kansas City area, and I hope that he is indeed available for our phone conversation today. And next week, the show, a little programming note, our show is going to be broadcasting live from the North Carolina area. Hey, Deth.
Hey.
Hey, Doug, Pagitt Radio here, my friend. How are you?
I'm great, Doug. How are you doing?
I'm doing just dandy myself. Hey, you're on the line here also with Victoria. She's the sidekick on the show here.
Hi, Deth.
Hi, Victoria. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
And Deth, for people who want to get in touch with you in the future, your name is spelled Deth.
It is spelled Deth. It looks like death, but it's pronounced date, like D-A-T-E.
Yes, I as you know, I one time referred to you as Deth when I had not met you but saw your name, and I've yet to live that down.
First time, yes.
Yes.
The first time you mentioned me, you're like, oh, there's a Deth asking a question.
Really? Is that what happened? Like at a public meeting? Did this happen in public even?
Actually, it wasn't public. We were on a conference call for when you and Tony were doing the traveling roadshow.
Yes,
and I was the contact for Jacob's Well, and so we hadn't met, and I had sent in a question. And you're like, Deth is asking a question.
Oh.
It's probably scaring everybody else on the conference call.
Well, I'll just throw my sidekick under the bus here. She also referred. She looked at the sheet today, our little timing sheet, and said, Deth Im, what is that? What is it? You know, she was making fun of me.
Sorry,
and I said, no. I corrected her on your behalf. So, but it's a Vietnamese name, is that right?
I'm Cambodian.
A Cambodian name. So, Deth, you do some really great work, and I was telling the listeners here that there is a practice in the United States. There's a number of them that make me feel like we live in the 15th century, with human trafficking, sex slavery, and usury. I mean, these are the kinds of things that people have thought, in developed worlds and in a rising collective consciousness of God life in the world, human beings wouldn't do anymore. But as it turns out, they do happen, and they happen in the United States in mass numbers. And usury is one of those things that people don't often know a lot about, where someone charges an exorbitant amount of fees to access money, and it basically puts people into some kind of debtor relationship with the people that they owe money to. So tell us a little bit more about this and the work that you guys do, and how people can do something to stop this ill in our society.
Yeah. So I live in Kansas City, Missouri, and in the state of in Missouri, we have more payday lending companies, or actually, it's probably more accurate to refer to the group. It's predatory lending, payday lending, which uses you use your paycheck to secure the loan. That's one form.
Yeah.
But so there's a variety of forms, but we have more payday lending companies per capita in the state of Missouri than in any other place. The way payday lending works is you have someone who needs a small dollar loan, and by that we probably mean anything from $100 to under $1,000, and they will go out and take out this small dollar loan, and then what they have to do, then the loan comes due in 2 weeks, the next time they get paid, and then they have to pay back the total amount of that loan. So the common example is someone is living paycheck to paycheck, their car breaks down, it costs $600 to fix their car. So they go to a payday lending shop and take out a loan for $600, and then in 2 weeks they have to pay back that $600 with some interest. And the reality is, if you need to take out a loan for $600, your ability to pay it back in 2 weeks, you're not going to be able to pay it back. And so the interest rate that they charge, a lot of payday lending companies will say, we're going to charge you, it'll be $15 for every $100 that you take out. But if you take that, if you extrapolate that over a year, which is how you would get an APR, annual percentage rate, then the average rate in the state of Missouri for a payday loan is 445%. It's not uncommon for people to be paying 1,000% APR on a loan.
Unbelievable.
As you can imagine, then what happens is they get caught in a debt cycle where then they will have to roll their loan over. So now it increases the amount, and people, a lot of folks end up taking out between 3 and 5 loans to try and pay back what they originally took out.
Okay, so somebody will see these signs sometimes. You often see them in parts of town where there's like, pawn shops and day workers. You'll see these billboards that'll say, need $500, borrow $500 for $120 or something like that, right? They have this way of sort of pitching it, which is like, if you need $500 right now, you can get all of that for $15 a month or something, right? This kind of very attractive deal. So people who have to live their lives because of either bad credit or their history, or because of the way that they earn money and get paychecks, they can't access any other means of accessing, $300, $500, $1,000, $2,000. So there's a whole other economy that functions in our world, isn't there? Like people who use cash only or use cashier's checks. Like there's a whole different way that this rolls for a large portion of our population. And so some of us don't even know that like payday loans exist, or we'd see a commercial and hear that phrase payday loan, but we don't have any idea what a payday loan is.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, and so what you're touching on is it's part of a larger issue, I think, of inequity in our society. Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking about where do these payday loan places exist, is they tend to be in communities of color, where so folks who are going to get payday loans they get them for a variety of reasons, but where payday loan has what they've done is they have offered a service in places that traditional banks will not provide those small dollar loans. So they are filling a service. So on that respect, it's great. The problem is that my big problem with it, and I think anybody who's a person of faith, their big problem with it should be that they've taken this, they found the need and they filled the niche, but then they designed a product that by its very design, it will entrap and enslave people. So by its very design, because if you could create, so here's dreaming, right? If people of faith really wanted to do something about this, then in our community, so if it's where you are, Doug, in Minneapolis, if you had churches that came together and said, we're going to pool our resources and we're going to provide an alternative, and we're going to go into those communities where payday lending is prevalent, and what we're going to do is we're going to offer these small dollar loans to folks. But instead of giving them 2 weeks to pay back, we give them 6 months to a year to pay back. Oh, and as they're paying them back over 6 months and 1 year, part of the money will be going back to pay on the principal of the loan, and the other part will be going into account so that they can start to build up a financial nest egg, so that in the future they will have an opportunity to not go back to a lending company, but then they would start to create something where they can borrow against themselves. It's their own kind of savings account. So if you want to talk about an alternative vision where people of faith are really doing something instead of talking about it, that's the kind of thing that we would be doing.
Okay, so to play the role of the other side here, there's people who would say, well, yeah, but the reason you have to charge this large amount of interest is these are very untrustworthy peoples, right? We know they're untrustworthy because they don't have very much money. They don't have any collateral. And if they need $600 right now, they're probably never going to pay that back. The argument, I would imagine, would go. So we have to charge that large amount, or our pool of money that we have available to lend people is just going to dissipate when people don't make good on these loans, and then to try to sue these people for $500 when they have nothing and then they don't have a job. How are we ever going to get the money? So we have to charge this large interest rate, right? Isn't that the argument?
I suppose that's one argument, and I think that so that's one argument. So here, I think I'd answer it in a couple of ways. So the default on payday loans or these kinds of things isn't any higher than on a regular loan, right? So whether I'm taking out a loan in my part of town, or it's about 8%, and so the default on payday loans isn't any higher. So this idea that they're a credit risk, that might be true, but it's not because they're defaulting on the loan. That's the first thing I would answer.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because I think people's sensibility is, well, these banker people, these are really smart guys, and they know how much people are going to default. But, as you've told me before, it turns out they don't default any more than anybody else, and they're defaulting on much smaller amounts of money in the first place,
That's okay. The other thing I would say is that there should, on the payday loan generally, they're securing the loan with these people's paychecks, so they're taking money. They're taking the money, the interest that they're paying. They're taking it out first. So it's not like you've got folks walking into a payday lending company and saying, "Hey, I don't have anything to my name. Can you give me a loan?" They're securing it with their paycheck. So you've really got working people who are going in to take these loans. But as you can imagine, that working people, there are a lot of us out there who live paycheck to paycheck, not because we're not doing well by our money, but because we're not making enough our wages are so low that you're barely able to pay. You're barely able to meet your obligations, right? So that's the second thing. But there's a third argument that I get the financial arguments, and I'm happy to have those financial arguments with folks. But again, for people of faith, the question becomes, are we always going to resort to the financial arguments about right and wrong, or is there something about our faith that compels us to have different kinds of conversations? And so when someone wants to talk to me about, well, but should these people have financial literacy, and should we do all these kinds of things? My answer is yes. I want all of us to have more financial literacy. Truth be told, I need more financial literacy.
Right.
But when it comes down to these products, these kind of loan products, when I'm starting to read my Bible, I hear things about, don't take advantage of folks. Don't loan money, or if you loan money, don't expect it to be paid back, because if they need it, then they probably need it more than you. And I just, the place in Deuteronomy that says, where God's talking about, here are the things you should do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Oh, and when you tend to your fields, make sure you have some left over, and don't go by and get those, because the widow and the orphan and the foreigner, those folks need it. And if we then kind of extrapolate that to the folks in our society who have real needs, when we're starting to have a faith-based conversation about this, I think it becomes real clear that. So let me say it in two ways. So there's a very radical part of me that says it becomes real clear when you loan money that you're not supposed to make money off of that. But if I temper myself and I'm not going to be truly, literally Christian, then I say,
or
I
Muslim,
lots of people, or Muslim, right?
Because they don't.
There are lots of people.
Yep. They have very clear rules in Islam about that very thing. Like, you just can't do that. You don't get to make money off lending people money.
To that point, in Kansas City, we built an interfaith network of folks to work with us. What we tried to do was to cap the rate on these loans at 36%, right? That rate was set by the FDIC as saying, this is the amount that you can make money on the product, but it won't be usury, 36%.
And that's what's called the APR. That's the annual percentage rate. So if someone paid it back in 2 weeks, it would be far less than 36% interest they would pay. That annual percentage rate is if you were to hold that out over a full year. Is that right?
Yes, you extrapolate it over a full year. It's the amount that the government charges its soldiers on loans, things like that, right? And when we worked, just to finish connect to your point about folks who are Muslim, as we were trying to work with the Islamic community, they're supportive of us, but what they said to us was like, that's too high, that's too much, because you're not to make any money off of it. And
36% too high, right?
To that point, I find some precedent in our Old Testament that says the same thing. So,
yeah, I think it's a really big deal, and it does dovetail right into this whole national conversation that goes on because of our way that we elect certain people in political offices, including the presidency. And this is one of the big conversations about how our economy works and how the world economy works, that too many Christians, it seems to me, don't really know that there is a place for a particular kind of conversation around economics, right? Because economics just feels like this whole other world, and Christians will say things like, well, we should store up our treasures in places where moth and rust can't steal them, and you can't love God and money, so money's just dumb, whatever. So I don't care, and I'm just going to sort of ignore it, and I'm going to be a people person and not a money person. The problem is we do have a system in this country that has a particular philosophy of money. And there's a suggestion from guys like Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan and others that would suggest, well, what you want to bring an end to is just sheer capitalism. Like, that's how it works. That's what's made this country great. That's what's allowed the faith of, the United States to have an economic engine behind it so that it can be the hope and the light of the world and all of these things. And so capitalism in and of itself, that's somewhat, sure, someone's going to make money, but they're good people. They're good, benevolent people that will do good in the world if they make a lot of money. You're kind of questioning that with this neo-communist Muslim fascism thing or socialism thing you've got going here, right? Like, they really do hear that.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me all those labels. I might put that on my business card.
Yeah, right. I'm a fascist and a socialist.
I would say this is I mean, if we want to have a specific conversation about politicians and what they support, I mean,
I do. I want to talk about how Mitt Romney thinks bad things about the economy, and that people like him shouldn't get to be president because he thinks bad things. He's not a bad guy, but his ideas about the economy, they're bad ideas. He's just wrong about the way it works, and his idea of what would be good for his crowd would be bad for the rest of us. But maybe you don't want to have that conversation, so I won't force that on you. But
well, I think I'm happy to. I mean, so some of it is because of the organization I work with. We're a nonprofit organization, and so we can't be partisan, and we're still in the midst of a cycle in which folks could use statements that I say against me. And given that your listenership is in the millions, I need to.
You should be careful because this is about to go viral.
But what I would say, without having the specific conversations, I think what I would say is I don't find any precedent in Scripture, in the Hebrew Testament or in the New Testament. I don't find any precedent that says that support capitalism. And that doesn't mean that I'm anti-capitalism. It doesn't mean that I don't have a 403B. It doesn't mean that I don't want to take care of my family and I'm looking to make sure that there are ways that I make money. I think for me, as a person of faith and as someone who takes theology seriously and tries to live that out, when people start to resort to those kinds of arguments to say, well, but you're trying to tear this down, or what are you trying to do to our economy? And I just want to say, I'm just not sure. I want folks to acknowledge when they're having those conversations that they're not having them rooted in some sort of biblical precedent. They're relying on other kinds of support mechanisms to make their argument, because they're not using the Bible. And if we can be clear about that, then I'm happy to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Distinction, Dave, is that we're going to have an economic system, and as it turns out, it's not going to be some version of agrarianism of 3000 BC, right? That's not the way we're going to talk about economies right now. But I think you're raising a really good point to say, but let's not bathe this view of capitalism that, look, money, people who lend money, they're the key to the capitalist economy. They really are the engines that provide all this. That we shouldn't bathe that theory in some sort of religious gold leafing that makes it be like, and that's the way that Lord God wants it for all people of righteousness and faith. But rather to say, like, that's a system we've got. What are we going to do about that if that's the system? And it seems that system could tip on us at any point and become really troubling. And that's where I think your suggestion of, well, how about providing an alternative? And I know churches in urban environments that have banks as a part of the church, and they must be trying to address this issue that you're raising, where you can go to the bank owned by the church and get loans, probably not enough to buy a house, but, enough to start a small business and enough to, take care of your car costs or to take care of some sort of an emergency need. And they've decided to just jump in and to provide an alternative inside of the system, because the system in and of itself isn't right.
I think that's right. I mean, so what I would say is, again, I'm talking specifically about small dollar loans, because that tends to be the places where there's already mistrust of institutions, right? So the reason why you have a cash and carry system in urban communities of color is because people don't trust those systems, and then they tend to vacate those communities. So if that's the case, if you really had churches, and I know that this isn't easy, and I know that it would be a pooling of large amounts of resources, but if you had churches that came in and pooled and said, hey, number one, we feel like this is a more just thing to do. But I think the other thing that for me, why this becomes a good, it at least becomes an alternative vision, because you could argue on the one hand, well, why don't we get credit unions to do that? And I think that's a great point, and we should. But in terms of an alternative vision for communities of faith, if you had churches doing this, part of what a church is doing is not only offering a loan product to folks who really need it, but part of the collateral that churches are using to secure that loan product should be the relationships that they are already building or have built with the person, right? So it's not like you have a person who just walks up and says, I want a loan, and you give it. But if churches have put money into this, and if it's their people who need the small dollar loans, the church in some ways is saying, we stand by this person, and we know the person. It's the person who comes and visits with us and who has community with us. And so that whole idea of risk and all that, that's secured relationally by the church. And what kind of vision are you creating around community then if you're really saying, yes, we're offering an alternative product because we don't believe in usury, but we're also using this sense of community that we've built with each other among our people, and then we've built with other churches to that's how you have a personal community, then connect to a corporate community, and that's all kind of that's being brokered by this thing that we call church, which we should be doing anyway. That, to me, is the larger vision of what it means to be church. And,
I know that for some people they would hear that and it sounds very sort of pie in the sky or idealistic or something. But if you look at 150 years ago in the United States, that's the way most banking worked, right? Most banking was small town banking, or it was inside of some kind of an ethnic community. Right. So if you were an Irish immigrant in New York or in Chicago or in Kansas City or something, you didn't just like go to your big franchise bank. You went to the bankers connected to your community, and they knew your family, and there was that kind of a deal. And the way that banks made money was by lending you $1 and having you pay them $1.05 back, right? They would make 5% interest on you.
That's right.
Now banks make their money off of user fees and usury, but off of user fees and off of people mismanaging their money. So if you look at Wells Fargo, they will tell you their income stream for these big banks is coming through people behaving badly with their money. It's through penalties. That is just insane, right? Like that you're now making money not off of interest within relationships. So I think what you're suggesting actually has a way that it can work, especially if you don't have 1,000 hands digging in the trough, right? Because one of the problems with these, just to preach for a second, one of the problems with these big companies is that they're owned by shareholders, not by individuals. They're owned by shareholders who only care that they get a return on their interest. People that are in 501c3 or 401bs and 401ks, these kinds of funding instruments for their retirement, they don't care what happens at the bank. They just care what's my return on this investment, right? So there's nobody who's feeling like there's a relationship there, and you have a lot of people that have to make money. So you have to make a lot of money so that everybody can get a little piece of the pie. Where in a smaller system, there's less people that need to make money, and the money just needs to be preserved. And in a nonprofit sense, for churches or whatever, they wouldn't need to have people's, be making an additional profit off of this money. They could just make sure that the money continues to exist, and could create a whole different relationship with money. Like I know churches that will do building fund drives, right? Like that'll take 5 years, and over the course of that 5 years, they'll take $2 million and have it in liquid cash in some account, earning a little bit of interest. If someone were to go together and use pieces of that to fund these kind of payday alternatives, there could be a really great way for that money to be used and have it be secured to a certain degree, and to know that something good was coming out of it without churches even having to put at risk any of their own capital. It's really somebody really should do this, Deth. I hope you do it. Are you going to do that this afternoon when you're done when you get off the radio here?
Yeah. I'm going to do that. Well, I would say that as you were describing kind of this small town banks, and then how big banks, these big huge corporate banks, what drives them, I think it really calls into question that the question, or the question that's asked, or at least the statement that's made, that you can't serve two masters. You can't serve God and money both.
Right.
And all I would say to that is to say, if your ultimate desire is to make money, then you don't want to do something. You don't want to do that. But if your desire,
that's great.
To your point about these small town banks or an alternative loan product, if your desire is to help people, right? And again, if your desire is to somehow engage the community well, then yes, you want to make money, but then you also want. How fulfilling is it that you're able to see a person, to use my previous example, who can cover the cost of fixing his or her car unexpectedly, and then in that process not have to go bankrupt and find all kinds of other means to meet those needs, but continues to be a part of the community, and the community lifts that person up. So that when that person pays it back, when there's another need, a couple months later, that person then, through his or her paying back, lifts someone else up. Right?
That's right.
It's, I wish I could. I had my Jimmy Stewart voice, but it's hello, good old savings and loans. That's what it is.
I don't know what that reference is to. Is that Jimmy Stewart? Is that a Jimmy Stewart reference? I've never seen It's a Wonderful Life. Really? Is that what that's from? That he does a whole thing about savings and loans?
Absolutely.
Well, he was a part of a savings and loan, and in his voice he was like, "Hello, good old savings and loan." But the point is, the savings and loan was rooted in this town, and they would give money to help people kind of do whatever, understanding that when folks pay back, they're giving it there. And when there was a run on the bank, what he said was, I don't have your money here because I've taken your money and loaned it out to this person. And because we know each other, because we trust each other, the money is getting rotated out. It's not like I'm holding a bunch of money, inside the vaults of my bank.
Right. Well, Dave, I think this is really important. And it turns up that next week I'm going to be in North Carolina. We're going to do the show from North Carolina. And the people there, Tim Condor and others, they're also working on an initiative like this, faith-based voices saying that these kinds of lending practices are immoral. I mean, just flat out that it's just unethical or immoral, and we should just knock it off. It doesn't. It's not the only option. But they want churches and other religious institutions to step up and to get into this game. Do you think this is happening? Is this happening around the country? Is there a movement afoot that in 5 or 7 years we're going to sort of notice more clearly that this is really capturing the imagination of people in the faith world, the way that like micro lending in other parts of the world has caught on?
I would say, so a couple of responses to that. First, there's an organization in North Carolina called the Center for Responsible Lending, and they really understand this issue inside and out. Huh. They were one of the, because of them, North Carolina was one of the first places that passed a cap on payday lending. So they have a cap on payday lenders at 36%. We've relied on the Center for Responsible Lending to do to help us set up our initiative. So that's the first thing. To your point about is there a movement that's going on, I would say I tentatively I give a tentative yes to that, because I do think and what we found here in Kansas City that transcends urban, rural, suburban, transcends race, is that when folks hear about payday lending, most folks respond, that's wrong. But what folks also have to be real clear what we're up against. The payday lending industry is a multi-million-dollar industry, and they will do everything at their disposal. And when it comes to money, there is so much of it to prevent any sort of reform. We first started out working with our state legislature, and they wouldn't. They decided that eventually they would pass reform, but they set the cap at 1,900%. That's going to be the cap that
1,900
can have.
1,900%.
That's the cap that you can charge on a loan, and so
you should get into the payday lending business. There's money to be made.
So I think when you say, is there a movement that's happening for people of faith, and why I can't overwhelmingly say yes, is it's going to take conviction, and it's going to take people of faith being willing to stand up and not just create an alternative product, but this gets back into an earlier point you made. This is a political process. We want to create caps for within states so that payday lenders can't keep gouging people, and you want to work on the alternative product, and you need both. But people of faith have to be willing to stand up and say, we're willing to do both, because when it's wrong, and that's how we're going to engage ourselves. And my final point would be, let's remember that the call to justice is more than just charity. It's to change the systems that oppress and marginalize us. And I hope, and maybe my challenge is, for people of faith, for my brothers and sisters who want to be a part of that, to let's not lose our conviction as we're trying to change the systems, and that is a political endeavor, not just an endeavor of charity.
That is fantastic. That's Deth Im. Deth, thanks so much for.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
Yeah, this is fantastic, and I hope that people who are listening and get turned on by this kind of thing will jump on it and make something good out of it. So, Deth, thanks, and we'll see you soon, buddy.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
Bye,
okay,
Dave, thanks.
Hey, Victoria, thanks for sitting in today.
Absolutely.
It was fantastic. And next week, we're going to be back with the show from North Carolina. And then the following week, the show is going to be from Austin, Texas. And then the following week, the show is going to be from Seattle. Pagitt Radio, hitting the road. It's going to be awesome. I'm touring with Bruce Springsteen. And so we're going to be in all those cities. No, I'm actually not, but I want my life to have more meaning. So I say stuff like that. Hey, Pagitt Radio, broadcasting live out of the Twin Cities. We will talk to you next week from North Carolina, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.